Welcome back, boys. Today we have one from Whatifalthist. He's gonna explain to us what happened to modern feminism.
Dave Chappelle, arguably the best comedian of our time, in a comedy skit looked up the definition of feminism and said it was someone who supports equal rights for men and women, and then made the joke, "I thought it meant frumpy dyke." He said that he supported the first dictionary correct definition of feminism, but the movement itself had wandered off to places that he could not support. I believe that this is a sentiment that a lot of people, I actually think most, including a lot of this audience, will agree with. Or they support the feminist movement's ideals but feel disillusioned with the actual state of the feminist movement as it exists today. Most young men today would agree that the feminist movement, as it actually exists, or at least the loudest proportion of the movement, stands for active hatred against men and a utopian push against what the fundamental reality of the world is. The question I would posit is when and how did this happen? Why did the feminist movement become so toxic, and where is this leading us? The answers go across a much deeper section of history, biology, and culture than you could possibly imagine. To earn extra live with the Right after I dropped out of school, I lived with a bunch of friends in Mexico for 5 months. A friend of mine's a professional dating coach, and he lived with us, and he makes a course for women on how to attract a good man. His number one piece of advice, right after don't cause unnecessary drama, is don't talk about social justice or feminism. He said it was the number one turnoff for men. My heavily young male audience probably knows this on a very
I've said it before, but it's like, if a woman brings up politics or feminism or whatever the hell, I'm like, I'm out.
personal level. One turnoff for men. My heavily young male audience probably knows this on a very personal level. When you're on a date and you hear a girl start talking at the patriarchy, even if you yourself have left-wing political leanings, you know she'll probably carry a certain amount of bitterness against men, even if you as an individual have done nothing wrong. The thing is that most men wanted feminism to work. Our society has pushed for the fastest change in gender relations ever since the 60s. And the fact that it happened so quickly without top-down authority, and that men run almost all of the gears of social power in society, means that most men wanted it to happen. If you asked men 10 years ago if they wanted equal rights for men and women, almost all would say yes. Something a lot of women don't believe is that when young boys start dating, they tend to put women on a pedestal, or more than they deserve, since they need the biological impetus to do so, since getting laid is more costly for guys and they're hornier. However, what normally happens over time is that the rose-tinted glasses start to wear off with the more experience the guy gets. In other words, if guys could get laid and be in happy relationships with women with feminism as it existed working, they wouldn't be complaining. It's extremely common that the most red-pilled, misogynistic guys were originally incredibly romantic about women. Something I found that doesn't bode well is that around 5 years ago,
Yeah, there's a lot of like jaded dudes that have like these certain like expectations, or it's usually like inexperienced dudes. They think like women act a certain way and stuff like that, but then they see the reality of what women actually respond to and their behavior, and they get like really bitter and angry. But yeah, the like dating here in the West is it's a very very toxic dating pool here. So if possible, you should go overseas to find to have better luck, to have a shot at having a legacy and a proper woman and children.
incredibly romantic about women. Something I found that doesn't bode well is that around 5 years ago, if you looked up stuff that disparages women saying, "I can't trust women," or "girls are liars," all the comments are, "Sorry, dude. I know you must have had a rough time, but there are good fish out there. Don't get disheartened." If you look up those things now, all the comments are, "Sure they are. Get used to it, man." I've started watching the Whatever podcast, where they bring on influencer-type girls, as well as various people in the dating world, and have them talk about different topics about dating, such as their preferences, how they should treat their partners, how male and female psychology works, and everything like that. I find it really insightful since I briefly ran a social club for influencers in Los Angeles, and it all lines up with what I saw. The thing that shocks me, and I saw this myself, is that women will say something completely misandrist, which is sexist against men, and not even think about it. Often they'll even agree that what they said was misandrist, or if a man were to say it against a woman, he'd be drawn and quartered, and they just don't care. Some of the craziest ones in the podcast was a girl who said all women are 10 out of 10s in attractiveness, and she sees an attractive man every few years. You'll often see stuff that's borderline sociopathic or deeply narcissistic, like another girl on the podcast says she gets into relationships to break men's hearts. When I ran a social club for influencers in Los Angeles, part of the reason I
That's why I say get out the West. And the window is closing. Like that won't last long because of internet and stuff like that. Like internet is or social media is influencing young women very much. So the clock is ticking. There is only like max 10 years left, max like 12, 13 years of this. And then the window is closed. Because if you listen to dudes who are overseas, I mean, they're right there on the ground. And I get the info from them. And they're saying the shit. So, yeah. I don't know what is left after that. Then it's kind of over.
To break men's hearts. When I ran a social club for influencers in Los Angeles, part of the reason I stopped running it and let my friend manage it is because you just couldn't have any expectation for the girls in the organization. The norm is for them to expect a guy who makes six figures and is 6 feet tall, which they don't realize is about 1% of the population. As a person who is 6'4" and makes over 6 figures a year, that's only the beginning of expectations, winnowing down to an infinitesimally small amount of the population. On top of that, there are loads of places where you can tell the girls have never listened to a male perspective ever on that topic. I feel like I don't need to keep giving examples, since if you're a young guy alive today in the Western world, you probably see misandry several times a week, if not daily. Hatred of men has become normalized in our culture. You can see this on a broader cultural level, with every aspect of our society, whether academia, grade schools, pop culture like Hollywood or TV, the government, much of the news media, and practically every outlet of society, disparaging toxic masculinity and then giving no examples of what positive masculinity would be like, which is just hating masculinity. We don't show any movies with manly...
Yeah, they're like, I hate men, you should be better. and they give like no example, they just fucking hate you for existing. Like, fuck. Like, I want to grow this channel and help dudes out, I really do. Open up some kind of like private community or something. I can chat with you boys.
Positive masculinity would be like, which is just hating masculinity. We don't show any movies with manly, compelling, and likable characters, and
this goes deeper. I mean, movies and video games also. I noticed I used to be, I guess I haven't said it before, but I used to play a lot back in earlier. I stopped playing video games, but like I just noticed like the quality of the games were horrendous, and they just kept coming out with garbage after garbage after garbage. And I don't really have faith in like big like AAA games, right? I mean, I see GTA 6 is around the corner, but you know, it remains to be seen what it will be. And yeah, games are trash. People now that want like good media, real media, or just entertainment that isn't like politically mangled or like destroyed. Like you can't watch like Netflix and stuff like that because that's been completely ruined. So a lot of people are switching to like anime and stuff like that. Yeah.
which is just hating masculinity. We don't show any movies with manly, compelling, and likable characters, and figures who try to provide young men guidance, like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate, have literal legal action taken against them. How did we get here? We're going to look through the 3 waves of feminism, of which we are in the 3rd, to establish a history and logic of feminism. The first feminist movement started in the late 19th century. It was largely led by upper-class women who were trying to get the right to vote. Democracies in the Western world largely gave women the vote after World War I, when women were needed to keep the home front operating while the men were off at war. For most of history and most cultures, women had a reputation for being deceitful, irrational, and weak, which you can see with both the myth of Pandora's box and Eve eating the fruit of knowledge. Most people today act as if the 1950s, or even the European Middle Ages, were horrifically sexist. However, they have very little comprehension of what the historical anthropological norm has been. For parts of Greco-Roman civilization, India, China, Islam, and every other major world civilization, the norm was for women to stay at home their whole lives, be married off at age 15, have no legal rights, and for absolutely terrifying things like female genital mutilation, foot binding, or widow burning. And in many ways, the West's success was built upon giving women more liberties.
Yeah, I remember long ago I saw some videos on like this like foot stuff, and it's like their feet are completely mangled, and it's like crazy.
And in many ways, the West's success was built upon giving women more liberties. However, as we go through this video, remember how strange the feminist movement would be to most other societies in history. However, in the 19th century in the Western world, you started to see attitudes develop that women were inherently more moral and temperate than men. Women were able to get the vote by saying they would be a conservative force pushing those values, while the world was changing very fast due to the Industrial Revolution. In countries like America, immigrants tended to be more male-skewed, so giving women the vote gave the native Anglo-Saxon population more power in the society. Victorian society put a very heavy emphasis on family values, and women were seen as the guardians of the family. Due to their new reputation for being defenders of tradition in the family, you started to see discourse around toxic femininity go into decline over the course of the Victorian period. If you were to ask the average man over history what the result of giving women the vote would be, they'd say it would create a hysterical, irrational, and profligate society. However, roughly around World War I, views like this just weren't present. Suffragettes did have a reputation for being lonely, preachy, and self-righteous spinsters, or one that's been kept with modern feminism for the last century. However, they were a decently small part of the population, concentrated among upper-class, WASPs, and frontier peoples. However, the Roaring Twenties saw an incredible change towards liberalization across all of society due to the trauma of World War I. Women who got their newfound independence from working for the war started to smoke cigars, drink, cut their hair short, and show lots of skin. The feminism of our day in many ways was made in the aftermath of World War I. Likewise, the second wave was also caused by war, this being World War II, where women had an even bigger impact on the home front. Women were brought back into the home in the 50s, but their children came roaring out in the 60s. What I believe to be the best historians of the last century, Carol Quigley and Amaury de Riancourt, both said the 1960s were side effects of suburbanization and industrialization. For almost all of history, women derive lots of pleasure and stability in being part of large social communities, stable societies, and religion. As all of these declined with the changes wrought by industrialization and suburban atomization, it caused severe social distress among women. The earlier parts of this process also probably kickstarted the first feminist wave. In the pre-industrial world, which required a lot of physical strength, men were very cleanly seen as superior to women since they could push a plow, do labor-intensive activities, or fight in ways women just could not. Your average woman in the pre-industrial world would have between 5 to 10 pregnancies in her life, which incapacitated her for a very significant part of her adult life. The birth control pill also allowed women to control their pregnancies, which let them have careers besides just having children. After World War II, the Western world became run by large bureaucratic organizations, whether in business or the government. These operated through creating set procedures, thus disincentivizing male traits like aggression or risk-taking. Women often say, "I don't need men," or "men add nothing to my life," but the reality is that men form religions, build countries, build companies, new technologies, build the roads and infrastructure, they fight in wars, and they do basically everything that involves fighting against the actual physical world and intellectual advancements. But women can say, "I don't understand any benefit men do," because they now see that it's an impersonal bureaucracy that does that, which is largely staffed by men, but they're not seeing an individual man in their...
Yeah, the thing is, they don't see all the shit in person. It's like the world keeps getting built by men in their situation, in their individual lives. There is no men present, so it's like it's it's easy to see why they believe it, the shit they believe.
Their life largely staffed by men, but they're not seeing an individual man in their life do things that are actually useful for them. And this is a big problem with today's society, where we don't see it as a society, we see it as a bureaucracy that does stuff for you. A good point Myron Gaines from Fresh and Fit made is that when women say, down with the patriarchy, I don't need a man, most men kind of write it off as a talking point. However, they don't realize that it's incredibly important for women. For almost all of human history, women were just physically incapable of doing the things you had to survive, such as pushing a plow, hard physical labor, or fighting. And so they would try to cater to and please a man who could. However, with bureaucratization, the rise of the welfare state, and the Industrial Revolution making actual physical force less important, it resulted in women not needing to please a man to survive, which was an absolute game changer for them. On top of this, men started to work in large companies as paper pushers or in factory lines, away from their families, making it harder for women to respect them, where, like for most of history, they would work with their wives in their own little plot of land. On top of that, the children were now being taken care of by schools, and loads of labor-saving devices like washing machines, prepared meals, vacuums, the pill, and more turned being a housewife from a legitimate full-time job with equal economic value to a man's to only a few hours a day. All of these processes made being a housewife an incredibly boring, isolating, lonely affair, without the shared communities of village women and their husbands and children away for most of the day. Women felt a sense of uselessness and boredom, and so started entering the workplace at record speeds. We know something was wrong with the old housewife system.
Yeah, it's like women yearn for people, right? They want to be around among people. It's like they enter the workforce, and then the many people to talk to and to fucking gossip with and shit. I don't know.
Started entering the workplace at record speeds. We know something was wrong with the old housewife system from how fast women of their own volition joined the workforce. What Amory and Quigley wrote at the time was that the 60s were a rebellion by women due to the boredom, meaninglessness, and isolation of their lives, taught their children to hate their fathers. This adds up historically and psychologically, since the cultural trajectory since that time has been a rejection of all authority, which is viewed as inherently oppressive and brutal under any guise. Postmodernism, the dominant ideology of our times, literally views all power or structure as inherently oppressive, which is what people with daddy issues say. We know that psychologically, people's senses of God, authority, the government, and power come from how they view their father. Interestingly enough, you can predict a society's ideology and government system based off the type of authorities fathers have in that society. The welfare state is more like a mommy, and in the time since, we've seen massive growth of management and welfare as authority switches from that of a father to a mother. The upswell of feminism during the 60s was tremendously powerful and tried to get women equal social status with men, mostly in the workplace but also for government, the media, or all positions of power. It worked decently well, with women working becoming something that was just seen as completely normal. There were some excesses like bra burning or saying men and women were completely the same in every regard, but these largely died down over the 70s, thus resulting in relative peace between the sexes from the 80s to 2000s. I think 2008 is the most important year of the 21st century, and it's fascinating to see how every trajectory that's taking over society today started in 2008, right after the crisis.
Yeah, it's like for me it was like I don't know. I was so fucking young, but I remember like something happened. For me, it was like I couldn't quite pinpoint it, but it was like between like 2011 and like 2013. It was like after that, it was kind of like the internet was shit, the media was shit. It's like the games were shit, and what he's saying is it was 2008, so it was going and like you can look at the chart. It's like basically yeah.
Crash, and you can look for certain keywords like whiteness, the patriarchy, and others associated with the modern social justice movement skyrocketing.
But at least I got to enjoy Prime Call of Duty and stuff before all the games went to shit. Yeah, used to play like Battlefield, Call of Duty. Uh, was younger, played like GTA San Andreas, um, God of War, stuff like that.
the patriarchy, and others associated with the modern social justice movement, skyrocketing from complete obscurity to popularity immediately after the Occupy Wall Street movement failed, and rising to complete social dominance today. This movement came
Yeah, and now the movies and stuff like that, it seems to be only like the hired some slop, you know, just straight slop with like ideologies and politics fucking everywhere in like the TV shows and the games, video games right now. And I was just thinking, like, if you're a game dev or like you want to create a game for the people, and you can have like backers, like somebody to fund the game you're creating, you should definitely make one about like true like war, masculinity, and like conquest, or like crusades and stuff like that, or maybe like a religious spin on it, like bring like a super like god or judgment and stuff like that. You make that into a game and you do it correctly for men, you made the new masterpiece, because the people are yearning for that shit in the video games. The games continue to be, you know, female only leads, and just garbage writing and storytelling and everything. So you make one about like God or war or something like super masculine, and bro, that's it. You're done. You made fucking millions if you make a game like that.
Wall Street movement failed, rising to complete social dominance today. This movement came about as leftists seized control of all of academia, and since the ruling class and road to wealth of the time was through college degrees, they were able to indoctrinate the ruling class in every single field, thus resulting in leftist dominance of all societal institutions today. In the same way the second wave was based around letting women into the workforce, the third is achieving complete parity with men in all fields, or 50-50 in government, high-paying jobs, cinema roles, and more regardless of the processes that get them there, or the ends over the means. In many ways, it was achieving dominance over men, as you can see with the complete absence of pro-male culture, tailoring education towards women, hiring aimed towards women. Another factor here is that dating apps and social media completely destroyed dating. Beforehand, there was more of a balance between the sexes because you would have to meet people in your actual life to date them. However, the norm with dating apps is that a normal woman can get 200 swipes a day, and normal...
Yeah, dating apps completely destroyed everything. Social media, Instagram, Tinder, you name it, bro. Snapchat. um, yeah, that shit opened up, like really showed what women are to a lot of dudes, and it like that's kind of like the red pill started. It's like dating and stuff, and then you were taught about like women's hypergamy, like the need for a man higher than them, like status wise or like financially and stuff like that. And I mean, you give a dating app to an average woman, they get like 200 likes. Of course, they're gonna become like super picky, and like they're gonna have like 500 fucking page list of like wants and needs from the man, because they have so many fucking options, but they end up alone, you know. That's what happens to a lot of women, and they become ultra bitter at men, and the rift continues, and it just continues to get worse and worse and worse. Yeah.
norm with dating apps is that a normal woman can get 200 swipes a day, and normal men get none or one or two a year. And this created an incredibly high value for women sexually, which allowed them to be able to become more delusional. And Instagram has largely had the same effect. All of this has made men irrelevant and caused a market failure in sexual relations. Over a period of 100 years, we can see women going from the pretty reasonable position of shared voting rights with men to the desire for complete social dominance in everything. In many ways, the feminist movement was poorly designed and started with incorrect assumptions about the world, which led us here. Let's look at those. Before we continue, please let me make a shameless plug. Fail. A theme we've explored in other parts of this show is that if you try to construct a worldview that makes incorrect assumptions that human nature or how the world works, is that it will completely fail, whether or not that was the intention. This is most evident in my video on communism, in that communism failed since it started with fundamentally incorrect views of human nature, which meant that its efforts just went nowhere. This is the case with feminism, where it started with the assumption that men and women are psychologically the same, and thus men and women should have complete equality over every field. However, the reality we found with modern science, which every side of the political spectrum in the sciences agrees with, is that men and women are psychologically and mentally different. Thus, expecting the same results is silly at best and suicidally delusional at worst. In the modern world, we hold the blank slate view.
This is just, there's so much, like, if you just max out your common sense, you're like a, for me, you're like a very, like, just decent, smart dude. Like, you don't have to be like ultra academically smart. If you just max out your fucking common sense and you have critical thinking skills and you can see nuance and shit, and you, oof.
View of human nature as well as the noble savage, which translate to the idea that humans are blank slates that we can program whatever we want onto, and also that humans are naturally good, while social programming makes them bad. Both of these are
That's such a like dystopian thing to think about. And we already watched like the thing about like these systems, they try to break the human spirit.
also that humans are naturally good, while social programming makes them bad. Both of these are completely incorrect, in that we know genetics drives around half of everything between personality, intelligence, how fast you drive, religiosity, political affiliation, and more. Humans are by nature cruel, violent, but also kind, generous, and everything else. Human culture can mold these separate conditions, but fundamentally they all exist within a biologically programmed human nature that doesn't change. As I said before, what I just said is the scientific consensus of everyone across the political spectrum today. We see this play out between men and women with several key psychologically proven differences. Women are more agreeable than men, which means they derive more pleasure from being in emotional harmony with others and struggle with disagreement more. For example, I have a friend who's an influencer, and we were talking about sponsors, which were basically pushing her around, and I told her that she needed to negotiate with them from a position of strength, since everyone's pushing their own self-interest in business, so she had to as well to survive, which she just shrugged and said it scared her. I have extremely low agreeability, and when I take risks and go into conflict, my mouth literally starts to water and my pulse goes up with excitement, which is something I think almost no woman can relate to. Or men love struggle and competition. This agreeability comes from women needing to take care of children, but also being weaker and not being the sex that had to wage war, so being more agreeable worked since they'd lose a fight. As a general rule, almost all psychological differences between men and women derive from women needing to have children and men needing to wage war or provide for them. Thus, women are more interested in people and men in things as a rule. This is in fact most pronounced in the wealthiest and most gender-equal societies, such as Scandinavia or the Israeli kibbutzes, so we know that this is an innate biological thing. Women are well paid in jobs that lean towards interest in people, like psychology and medicine. However, most well-paid jobs are things that require interest in actual physical things, and most jobs that are interested in people, like teachers, are poorly paid in that they need less training. The rallying cry for the feminist movement has been the so-called wage gap, or that women make 76 cents for every dollar a man does. I can't believe this is still the feminist movement's unifier, given it's been pretty strongly disproven. Men and women make the same amount for the same positions and hours worked. If you remove having children as a factor and look at young people, women make more money. Due to men's interest in physical things and love for risk-taking, many highly paid professions like engineers, CEOs, tech, and more are over 95% male. Look at this YouTube channel, which is 96% male and talks about philosophy, anthropology, and history. And YouTube has no gender discrimination at all, which means these disparities are being self-selected. In my entire field of geopolitics consulting and predicting, I don't think there's a single woman. It's not like there's discrimination going on as well, because most engineers or geopolitics or CEOs want there to be more women. in their fields so they can meet more women. Obsession with a certain topic is very male. If you were to make honest lists of the greatest conquerors, philosophers, adventurers, prophets, statesmen, CEOs, and more over history, all of the top 10 in each of those in any honest list would be men. Although men and women have equal IQs, men have a much bigger IQ and personality spread, since nature takes more risks with men since their breeding levels can fluctuate so much. The feminist philosopher Camille Paglia said that the reason there's no female Mozart is the same that there's no female Jack the Ripper. We know this is biological, not cultural, given it doesn't fluctuate over societies or history and is constant. There's this myth that's incredibly difficult to shake, but really has no evidence, that after World War II, there's this theory that there were ancient matriarchies that were destroyed around 1000 BC. It is true that these societies worshipped female goddesses and measured inheritance in many cases through a female line due to polygamy, but in all of these societies, men were the ones in charge, and they were patriarchies. And so every single society in human history has been a patriarchy. The fundamental reality of the sexes is that a woman could only have one child a year, while a man could theoretically have 500. This makes women's eggs much more valuable than men's sperm, which means men have to try harder. However, this has also resulted in nature taking far more risks with men, because men die in war, or they also practice polygamy. So you have twice as many female ancestors as male ancestors. What this means is that men have gone through twice as much selection pressure as women due to war and hunting. And these are largely selections for survival and being able to cooperate in groups and practicality. Meanwhile, what happened with women was that the most successful men would just marry off the women in any situation. And so their dominant selection pressures have been towards keeping children safe, having children, and maintaining popularity in the community without being ostracized. On top of this, men are capable of organizing into groups which women are not. This is since men had to work in groups to hunt while women didn't to gather. Men who didn't cooperate were killed, which did not occur for women. Over human history, religions, militaries, corporations, and governments were all built through men, and men naturally work through military-style hierarchies, like the tribal hunting band. We find no female equivalent of large female organizations, and again, we know that this is biological, not cultural, given it's true across every society in every period of history. The question I ask here is, why did we ever expect men and women to have the same results? One sex cooperates in large groups, has a subset that's completely obsessed with what they do, is competitive, has to compete more to reproduce, while the other has to take long periods of their life off from work to have and take care of children. Knowing all of this, the goals of the modern feminist movement of total sexual equality seems unrealistic. In many ways, this is since our society only values money and power, thus putting family, children, community, and the private life, or the things women provide, as if they have no value, thus forcing women to play men's games. This is incredibly silly and is the cause of the major social problems we're having today, as well as the collapses in birth rate that will kill the world's economy and society over the next few decades. In many ways, this is a covert form of sexism, of trying to treat private life that women have historically provided as irrelevant, while treating the man's world as the only that exists. Over history, people treated family as the most important thing in their lives, as well as having children. Statistically, we've found that the thing that makes people happiest is strong interpersonal relationships. And it's no wonder that we completely devalued this interpersonal life, and now we have mass depression and mental illness today. This is since our society's been trying to push for equality, whether or not it makes sense, as equality has become our society's main value in the democratization that's occurred since the French Revolution. However, the ugly reality that the modern world doesn't want to come to is that people aren't equal and never will be. They can be equal beneath the law and indecency offered them, an idea invented by Christianity, but some people are harder working, more moral and intelligent than others, and if we act as if that's not the case, it will fail. At its worst, the drive for equality is an envious hatred of everything that is beautiful and great, trying to crush everything back to the ugly office buildings and malaise and lack of any belief in heroism, glory, or beauty that our society has today. Our modern society acts as if men are toxic and women are not. However, the reality that's been proven through studies is that men and women are equally aggressive, however, in very different ways. For men, their aggression's obvious. It's called war and violence. However, the other side of this is that men are capable of much higher social cohesion, which is why they form large groups much more easily. I form social clubs for fun, and I've gotten on my 6th now. Male social clubs tend to treat all the men as brothers, and if there's a tension, it's dealt with and put away, and everyone goes back to being friends. However, women use relational warfare. As a general rule, men treat the physical world as their place of conflict and entertainment, whether business, war, or sports, and they want to put their relationships in the back burner. Women are the opposite in that they use relationships for competition and entertainment and put the physical world in the backseat. Anyone who's dealt with girls groups know that they have trouble scaling, let's say, past 4 people, and that large groups of women are often embroiled in drama and gossiping. It wasn't until I ran a social club for influencers in Los Angeles that I realized the sheer scope of this, and that large amounts of women actually enjoy using relational warfare. I'm sure lots of you know girls who seem permanently embroiled in drama. That's partially since it's effective, as we've found with studies, that women who spread a rumor that another is more likely to get a high-quality guy, which results in her genes surviving. An interesting tangent is that there's a theory that religion is a form of limiting female relational warfare through having shared values enforced by the group against it. Women tend to see the world through emotional states and men through physical states. If you hear a man tell a story, he'll focus on the physical actions of the story, while the woman will share her feelings and internal states throughout it. Camille Paglia made the fascinating point of how when men write stories, they focus mostly on the plot, while for women they tend to write stories that the changes in the internal states of the characters without a linear plot. The tactics that women use for relational warfare are GSR, or gossiping, shaming, and rallying, and as you look at the social justice movement, that's exactly what they do. However, a part of this is that women will use their emotions as blackmail. Social justice has perfected this on an international scale. Women as a rule do not view the world through linear processes, rather holistically, and since women tend to view the world through emotional states, they demand people support their emotional states. Think of high-status women like princesses or pop stars. They're supposed to have people around them who will validate their emotional state and agree with them, even when they know it's not true. An example of this is that when a girl asks you how she looks in a dress, she's not really asking for your opinion, she's asking you to validate her emotional state that she looks good. Or alternately, when women tell you their problems, they're not really looking for a solution, but for you to validate their emotions. Men have protected women against the harshest parts of the outside world, whether the jungle, war, forest fires, and all that sort of thing. And even when one tribe conquers the next tribe, they'll take the local women who will survive and the men will die. Also, because women view the world through emotional states, men end up lying to women and sugarcoating the truth, so as to not cause trouble. The reason women view the world through emotional states is that men protected them from the harshest objective things of the outside world, like war or tigers, while women's evolutionary pressures have been towards things that relate to emotions and relationships. For example, maintaining psychological stability for children and coddling them so that they can grow up to become healthy adults, or surviving relational warfare, which occurs through emotions. However, this means that since women view the world through emotion, that toxic femininity is incapable of creating a distinction between what they want to be true and what's actually factually true. And you see this with feminism today, where at no point does feminism or the left say, this is something that I don't want to be true, but still is, and if you disagree with what they want to be true or their fantasies, they'll destroy your career and socially shame you. Women, since they view the world holistically, can often hold contradictory ideas in their head at once. And this can work as a way of finding quality in a complicated world where, let's say, maybe you want a guy who can be both tough and kind in different situations, or who can be silly and serious in different ones. However, once you push this logic too far, you just get schizophrenic silliness. And you see this with the social justice movement, where it tells young men, for example,
Yeah, a lot of women they can be with a lot of men and sleep with a lot of men, and they get like this. They like Frankenstein you, so they expect to for if you're the next guy, they expect you to have all the traits, all the good traits of all these different men in one man, and I mean that shit is just impossible, you know.
schizophrenic silliness. And you see this with the social justice movement, where it tells young men, for example, you must learn to end your sexism, but also you're sexist no matter what you do. On top of this, that gender doesn't exist, but also we need to equalize the genders. Matt Walsh has this very interesting movie where he asks feminist activists, what is a woman? And none of them can even answer the question because it's not a logical consistency. It's about making people's emotions, and especially this group of women's emotions, good. But what it ends up with is a schizophrenic worldview that provides young men absolutely no incentive to work with it because they look at it and think, if I'm sexist no matter what I do and I'm always in the wrong, why should I support you? If you want to understand the modern feminist movement, start with the principle that it doesn't want to be held to any standard or be judged against negatively. And it tries every single thing in society so that there is not a single place where you can even judge a woman for doing something wrong. As a personal example for what I think is the sort of thing that's going on here is that I had a female friend who was trying to get a job from me, and she would keep on saying, oh, Rudyard, treat me like one of the boys, and I'll take it if you can treat me like a man because I want to have the privileges of being a man. And I said, okay, here are 5 pieces of constructive criticism. If you can change your life in these 5 ways, I'll hire you. Then she became incredibly angry and said I couldn't speak like that. And I said, I'm treating you as I would treat a man. Very scary manifestation of this is the growing belief in individual truths. And people will often say, that's my truth, or everyone has their own separate truth. And you see this with the trans movement where, because they believe themselves to be a different sex from what they were born, no one else in society can invalidate that. And what this has effectively done is destroyed any sense of standards or any sense of shared identity, which effectively destroys any ability for society to coordinate or work together on any level. In hard times, you need to believe in the truth because if the Mongols burn your town down, you need to be on board with the same project of how to deal with it. However, once you get rid of the truth, it gets rid of any accountability against the left. We all know that building a society based off emotions is insane and won't work. And you'll often run into feminists who say, you can do that, but you can't judge someone. It all leads back to you can't hurt a woman's feelings. And the thing I think to myself is men die in war and are drafted. It's not like we want to do that, but that's the deal that we get in the world. And when we're talking about feelings, the feminist movement only looks at women's feelings and doesn't care at all about men's. The entirety of political history is men putting away their feelings for the common good, and then the feminist movement just thinks that we can all get what we want all the time without any cost. You combine this with the way modern feminism has developed with A, no clear standards to assess itself through, and B, with its moral system built off how people feel emotionally, rather than the West's 1,000-year history of assessing its legal code through intentions. I remember on the Whatever podcast, they asked women what they thought feminism meant, and most said it meant whatever woman wanted it to. That arbitrariness sounds flexible and kind, but the reality is that it can become tyrannical since it has no boundaries. The thing with an effects-based moral code, or the moral system is based off how the hurt person feels, is that offense becomes in the eye of the beholder. This means that people can claim anything as offensive, and thus they rise in status if they are victims, since everyone else has to validate their emotional state. I'm sure many of you can relate to dealing with women who take offense at very minor things. This is a power game. Toxic women look for things to be offended by as a way of establishing their social status. The great irony is that I have no doubt that people will take offense from this video. I also bet that none of them will talk about if any of my ideas are true or discuss it on an intellectual basis.
No, they'll go immediately after your personality, you as a person, and they'll immediately go for the personality, for the person. They'll just say you're a bad person, and immediately that invalidates all your thoughts and opinions, which is complete bullshit.
Rather, they will claim offense and say I hate women, which is not true. I love women, but I'm able to see their flaws realistically, alongside their many positives such as their irrational kindness, caring, uncompetitive nature, love for their children, attention to detail, and care for stability. In doing so, they will use relational warfare to claim harm and thus try to remove me as a potential competitor, and something they can be held accountable to. The problem that the feminist movement ran into was that since it didn't understand how women actually existed in the real world, designed to movement for as if women were men, and then because it had no protections against toxic femininity, allowed it to manifest to a horrifying degree. This was the first attempt in history to build a predominantly female organization. We have 50,000 years of experience with how to build organizations for men and around 50 for women, and first attempts normally fail, but that allows future improvements and successes. Historically, women have almost never been independent. They've either been the responsibility of their father or their husband. And thus, there would always be someone who would help them out of problems they get into. And thus, with the feminist movement, they don't understand that that's not the case for men. And so they'd like to have the liberties of men, while at the same time not understanding that men bear the cost of their actions. And we live in a society in which if a woman gets into a hookup she doesn't like, she can say it wasn't consensual afterwards. If a woman gets pregnant, the man has to support her.
Yeah, they want all the benefits and all the privileges, but zero accountability for anything and their actions.
If a woman gets pregnant, the man has to support her and the state supports her. She can also get an abortion. On top of that, if a woman feels judged or emotionally hurt, the society will shame the man that did so. And so our society bails women out of having the consequences of their actions. Historically, women have looked for husbands to take care of them through the expensive process of having children. However, literally, right when women got the ability to vote, the welfare state came into being, effectively turning the state into a husband to support single mothers. As women gained more social authority in society, you saw the step-by-step growth in bureaucracies, management, and government, which effectively existed.
Yeah, it's like I haven't seen a chart on this, but I would imagine it's like the more state and like welfare came into women's lives, the kind of less uh happy they became with men. So it's and like the respect completely went out the window. So it's like state and welfare goes up, but the other side, the like love for men and respect and all the good shit, that goes down. So it's like goes like that.
You saw the step-by-step growth in bureaucracies, management, and government, which effectively exists.
That's why so many of them are like, I don't need no man, I hate men. It's because of these systems. Like they can hate men and dislike men, and they don't really need a man in their lives because they have the money now to just pay somebody to fix whatever the fuck problem they have.
You saw the step-by-step growth in bureaucracies, management, and government, which effectively existed to feminize the society. If you look at the economics of welfare, this is even more stark. Men are economic contributors to the society for over 30 years, and women are for about 5. And if you look at welfare payments, it's taking from men and largely giving it to single mothers. And if you were to judge this from another society's perspective, in which a woman married a man and in exchange had him support her, what's happened is that the state has entered in as an intermediary so that women get the support that comes with marriage without any of the costs or commitment. In New Zealand, and these numbers are pretty normal around the Western world, the average woman's contribution to society was
Yeah, I mean, now it's like no fault divorce and shit. The thing is, if you divorce a man with no fucking reason, and like that should be like punishment, like straight up. Like you should not be able to take half the shit and the children and get fucking alimony. Plus, like they can even go after your fucking pension, bro. That's insane. In the U.S., they can straight up take your fucking pension. Holy shit.
numbers are pretty normal around the Western world. The average woman's contribution to society was net 140,000 negative, which means that that money either came indirectly through the state taking money from men through welfare or through marrying. And this is after women have said that they don't need men and they can be totally independent, but they've used the society to continue to take revenue from men while men get nothing really in return. This is partially, as said before, so that the state can act like a pseudo no-strings-attached husband, but also HR departments came into corporations and government bureaucracy stepped into every aspect of life. demanding signing paperwork for going whitewater rafting or appealing to local government to put a fly screen on your back porch. This is since by adding bureaucracy and procedures, it limits actual interpersonal conflict, which tends to scare women who are more agreeable. It also limits the potential for risk, which women also are more scared of. This is a deleterious...
That makes a lot of sense. Like extreme, like a lot.
It also limits the potential for risk, which women also are more scared of. This is a deleterious...
Like the topics I've looked at, there's so much info that is like, it's easy for me to forget because I don't have like the best memory. I'm just a normal dude, man.
Serious effects upon societies. Europe went from being the most important place in the world economically, culturally, militarily, politically, technologically, and more, to being none of those, in many cases due to government bureaucratization that made innovation not really something you wanted to do anymore. You saw the same thing happen in the American Rust Belt, and you're currently seeing it go on in the blue coastal states today as industry moves to more economically loose places. The relationship between women and the bureaucracy/government is symbiotic and benefits both sides. Young unmarried women statistically are the demographic that votes the most for the left, which is the party of bureaucracy and the government. However, for the bureaucrats and planners, young unmarried women are the demographic that is physically weakest and most fragile, alongside being more emotional and agreeable, thus making them want to side with power and making them easier to control and manipulate emotionally. If you push men too far, they'll snap back and bite. However, as we've sadly seen from the historic norm of women being kept at home with no rights, that's not the case with women. On top of this, women control 85% of consumer spending, given they tend to make decisions for the whole family like buying houses, cars, family movies, toys, going grocery shopping, or vacation. They also tend to care more about details. Thus, advertisers were rewarded for pandering to women. This is why Netflix released a TV show, Sex/Life, which glorified a woman cheating on her perfect husband with her hot ex as liberating. When I first saw it, I felt like something the Taliban would make up as anti-Western, anti-women propaganda. There is no place in our society where we give women a no. Men often lie or sugarcoat the truth for women in order to get laid. Politicians do so in order to get votes, and corporations do so in order to get women to buy their stuff. At what point anywhere in our society do we tell women, this is things that men are objectively better at, these are what your strengths and weaknesses as women are, and anything like that? And the reality is we just tell women whatever they want to hear, but anyone who you have that happen to, or in any relationship in which one side is not allowed to criticize the other, the side that can't be criticized will grow incredibly arrogant and entitled, and that's what's happened. We're at the point where you can't even say being fat is unattractive, which everyone knows, because we're this scared of hurting women's emotions. And you see absolutely nothing on the male side, where our society constantly insults men. This is why we end up in a society in which we are obsessed with toxic masculinity, and literally even mentioning the concept of toxic femininity can get you canceled. It's also a society in which my parents were called into school when I was 9 since I was drawing swords, since they were worried I might end up becoming violent. Alternately, a society where young men feel so impotent and angry at feminized schools that they shoot them up, something you never see anywhere else in the historic record before the rise of feminism. We have an educational system in which everything is systematized and allows very little independent action, where kids aren't allowed to run around and often don't have recess, where they can only speak when they raise their hands in certain order. They don't really teach subjects that men are into, like global politics or military history or craftsmanship or coding or engineering. They say masculinity is inherently toxic, as is aggression, and we should always push for cooperation, inoffensiveness, and harmony. And then we wonder why young men shoot up schools, and why in a couple years the college system will be 2/3 female, because we have an incredibly feminized education system, and through that, we've feminized the society. I read a really interesting book named Evil.
Yeah, I mean, I meet some like college dudes and stuff like that. They're like extremely like feminine, and they don't really like. I get a feeling like they're holding back, but it's like try to talk to them, and it's like they just like blurt out some NPC line about some politics, and I'm like, okay, GG. Yeah, okay.
And through that, we've feminized the society. I read a really interesting book named Evil by Baumeister. It explains two great truths about evil. The first is that evil's never black and white. People never say,
I'm evil and I enjoy doing evil things for the sake of it.
like some cartoon villain. In every case, including the Nazis, the evil people believed they were doing some good, often facing incredibly hard circumstances, and their actions made total sense if you looked into the context they came from. The second point is that evil should be judged through the context of the incentives of the person doing the act, not the person it's happening to. What happened with modern society is that the entire society told women that they were oppressed by men, that men held them down, that by succeeding they were doing a moral good. On top of this, it gave them no moral structure or constraints. The feminist movement is practically saying women are always in the right and men are always in the wrong. This resulted in a situation where it's very easy as a woman to blame all your problems on men and take no responsibility, since the system actively tells you to do so. A significant reason for this is that large parts of the modern feminist worldview is established by Marxists who do the exact same thing of saying the working classes are always in the right and the upper classes are always wrong no matter what anyone does. Another way this works out is that feminism tells women that men are the source of all their problems. Even blaming stuff as banal as office buildings being cold or blaming slut-shaming on men.
I remember this. It was like the office was too cold, and that became like a big story, a big problem.
Even blaming stuff as banal as office buildings being cold or blaming slut-shaming on men who really want women to be sluts, well, women are the ones who are incentivized to shame as a way of keeping the market value of sex high. On top of this, the flattery inherent in feminism of the female condition causes women to have actually no real ways of dealing with their problems that they have as women. If someone tells you you're perfect, that means it offers no systems or ways to deal with the problems you face in your life. This then results in women projecting all their insecurities onto men, which the society tells them to do. I do believe that there is a positive version of female empowerment and feminism. However, it has to have a clear moral code, take account of its own failings, and be able to come up with terms for the reality of female nature. It's often heartbreaking to see how women have been treated over history, whether with foot binding, female genital mutilation, or keeping them in poorly ventilated rooms for their whole lives. However, the reality is that as of now, the toxicity of modern feminism encourages and actively incentivizes men to push back towards these negative historical norms. For women's own sake, as a sympathetic man, I beg them to restructure feminism before something really bad happens. The problem is that I know that no one in the feminist movement or its leadership would listen and would call me toxic and misogynistic for just bringing up these concerns in the first place.
Yeah.
No one is winning in the current sexual arrangement. First of all, women bear a lot of the costs here. Women, as of now, have the worst mental health ever in the historic record. I do not know a single girl under the age of 25 who does not have some serious mental health condition. Young women are plagued by a litany of horrible mental illnesses, such as anxiety and depression, which is reflected back into the society through political radicalism. I've covered this topic in greater depth through this video. However, there are a litany of negative effects from the feminist movement that we cannot talk about in society. These include the massive rise in psychological problems among the younger generation, who were the first in history to grow up without full-time mothers, and which hurt psychological stability, the massive collapse in wages due to women's entrance in the workforce, which turned women working from empowering to a necessity for them to survive. On top of this, on a statistical basis, women who work less hours and women in more traditional societies are happier than those in more empowered ones. We treated women as men and were surprised it made them more depressed. Again, I'm not suggesting a return to the old housewife system here. The fact that women chose to leave it so fast, and many women do find their work indispensable to their lives, means I don't think that's the answer. However, I am saying that our current system has flaws and drawbacks that we are unable to honestly look at. On top of this, we're seeing dystopian dating conditions which have horrifying effects among young men, which I describe in this video. 2/3 of men from ages 18 to 30 are single, while only 1/3 of women in the same age bracket are. I'd guess that for guys my age, and I'm 22, 80% of men are single. Conservatively, 30% of young men under the age of 30 are virgins.
Yeah, most dudes I meet are single. It's like, yeah.
80% of men are single. Conservatively, 30% of young men under the age of 30 are virgins. Your average young baby boomer had around 10...
Wasn't it like, which country was it? Was it in Japan? I think it was Japan. It was like, was it true? It was like 50% of men under the age of 30 was it virgins or didn't have sex in the last year? maybe it was virgins, which is fucking insane.
Dates a year, and women under the age of 30 are virgins. Your average young baby boomer had around 10 dates a year, and for millennials, it's 1.5. Girls flake on 56% of dates, and only 9% of people messaging on Tinder actually go on a date, and I'm guessing far less than that end up with sex or a real relationship. As I've said many times before, young male sexual frustration is one of the top predictors for political violence, like wars or crime, which puts us in a very dangerous position. On top of this, young men are barred from hiring due to diversity quotas. They're socialized through an incredibly feminized education system, shoved through bureaucratized, feminized corporations, and a society terrified of any adventure or risk, and through a social structure that provides them no role models or masculinity. I could not have designed better conditions if I wanted to for a horrifying political crisis and the rise of far-right sentiment if I even tried to. Myron Gaines from the Fresh and Fit podcast has made the very prescient mental structure that for all of human history before the feminist movement, the deal was that men traded resources for women's sex. And this is how marriages have worked. However, what happened with the feminist movement, which literally says, down with the patriarchy, I don't need no man, is that women basically refuse to trade in this old contract. And our society is stuck between the old and the new contract, which is completely rejecting masculinity. However, the problem implicit in this is that if women reject having negotiating power or be willing to give anything to men, that also doesn't give any reason for men to work with women, which is terrifying. If I was one of the leaders of the feminist movement, I would be scared straight, since organizationally and physical force, men hold all the cards, which is why every society in history has been a patriarchy and has treated women horribly for most of history. Part of the energy for the feminist movement stems from women's subconscious knowledge of how precarious their position is. However, I look in shock at how no one in the feminist movement seems to realize they're setting up the conditions for their own demise. Over the course of history, the two things women have been able to use to counterbalance the incredible power of the patriarchy have been sex and kindness. And we all know the story of the Beauty and the Beast, which exists in every culture, in which a young, beautiful girl is able to tame a horrific monster through those two things. However, what I see today is that young men's two largest cultural interactions with women are feminism and corn, and that's not a good combination because one of them makes young men degrade women and view them with contempt, and the other one makes them hate them. The most important thing in human societies is family and breeding. Feminism has meant for the first time in history, the average person aged 30 is childless and unmarried. On top of this, with the combination of welfare, which supports single mothers, divorce courts giving the kids and a majority of a man's money to the woman for having done nothing wrong, and the breakdown of patriarchal authority, men simply have no reason to start families or stick by their women. 70% of divorces among the college-educated ruling
A lot of dudes are checking out. Like an incredible amount of dudes are just done. And it's just becoming more and more and more. And yeah, a lot of dudes are going overseas. A lot of dudes are checking out. Oof, 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 oof. Things are getting bad.
start families or stick by their women. 70% of divorces, and among the college-educated ruling class, 90% of divorces are initiated by women. I've read an interesting theory that the reason that women take a man's last name is actually to give the man a sense of responsibility for his family to make him less likely to leave. In Myron Gaines' term, we've given women resources either indirectly through the welfare state or through having strong divorce laws. Well, we don't give men any of the sex that they would get in exchange for that, thus destroying the structure of the family. What we've seen develop is that the split family has become the norm among the working and middle-class Americans of all races. This is degenerating to the family relations that existed 5,000 years ago. As I've explained in this video, family relations predict a society's views on the world, government, and God. In effect, this is training a population without discipline, sense of agency, community, or respect. As J.D. Unwin said in his book Sex and Civilization, where he went through every culture in history in the world, and showed that once a society weakens weakened sexual restrictions in the family, it had 100 years before complete social breakdown, which we're seeing today. On top of this, no developed country in the world has a stable birth rate. We'll likely see the world's population half by the end of the century, and the breaking of countries like China, Russia, the European Union, Canada, or Japan due to a crisis in birth rates. This will cause these countries to stop functioning at any level, given they'll have two 80-year-olds for every 30-year-old to support them. This is the underlying thing that will kill the feminist movement. As of now, 45% of Gen Z women are projected to never marry. Once we start to see social codes completely break down due to lack of a birth rate, societies around the world will have to return to traditional gender roles to see their populations stabilize. This will be a global trend that will kill feminism. I hope that there are feminists who are willing to watch this video in good faith and look at the trends I predict. As of now, we will see social breakdown due to collapsing populations alongside the worst female mental health in history, a horrifying rebellion by young men. However, what I see in modern feminism is mostly pushing offense for the sake of social status and a complete disregard for the health of their societies. As a young man, I'm worried at the brutality of what might come next. I think the sexes need balance and to hold each other accountable. Societies do best where women hold men to high standards to sleep with them, and the society understands and bans toxic femininity. A big reason the West was the most successful civilization in history was that it was the only major civilization that didn't arrange marriages, marrying women off at age 15 and also let them act as independent citizens rather than keeping them in harems or in the house for their whole lives. As Christian civilization grows weaker, I pray we don't go back to these historically normal gender relations and that we don't replace toxic femininity for toxic masculinity.
Right. It was a good video. Oh. What's frustrating about the current state of feminism is that inevitably it will get backlash, and the pushback could lead to, unironically, the very oppression they said they were fighting. The world is about to learn a single scariest sentence for any who fight with the abuse power through identity politics. Then let me be evil. Yeah. Mm. Most human beings have an almost infinite capacity for taking things for granted. That men do not learn very much from lessons of history is the most important lesson of all the lessons from history. Anyway, boys, what do you guys think? I appreciate everybody for tuning in. I'll catch you boys on the next one. Take care of yourself.